Going to go ahead and get ourselves going into this third session of our Bible study, Jesus, an Urgent Call in Extraordinary Times. And it's good to have all of you here. We have a good number of folks who are trying to make it all the way through, and a couple of new folks just tonight. This is just fantastic. All of this is grounded in the Gospel of Mark, which the folks who've been hanging out know that that's my favorite gospel. And I chose it not only because it's my favorite, but because it is grounded in a sense of urgency, urgency that is expressed in action. And I think that's just kind of where we are in our world. We have some urgency on a number of issues facing us. And we, like the first hearers of the Gospel of Mark, are not needing a saving action in the sweet by and by. We're needing something here and now that's concrete, that makes a difference in our lives. This is not a test, but I'm going to open this up a little bit so it feels a little more conversational. This gospel, I believe, is written after the summer of 64 of the Common Era. And I believe it was written in Rome. Does anybody remember what was going on in the summer of 64 in Rome? That's really weird, isn't it? Summer of 64. Yeah, let's dance it. Let's dance it.
The fire.
The fire.
Right?
That's right. Nero decided he was going to clear out the slums for a new palace, and didn't have good weather report. The wind came up and 70% of Rome burnt. And Nero, not wanting to take responsibility for this, decided to blame who? Anyone?
The Christians.
The Christians, that's right.
Christians.
Yeah, I like that was very close. The Christians. And so the Christians were tortured and killed. They would torture one who would give up another, and it's just kind of chain reaction of death and dismay for this fledgling church in Rome. So they escaped to worship in a very unusual place. Any takers for where they worshiped?
The catacombs.
The catacombs, just outside of Rome. These underground passageways that were really cities of the dead, a place where those Christians who had died would be placed in niches along the walls of long corridors, and occasionally it would open up into a little family chapel. And I'm with the historians that think that the Gospel of Mark is not so much a book, but a sermon that's preached to Christians who are in hiding in the catacombs under Rome. And it is written to a people who were afraid, written to a people who were really reticent to share their faith, written to a people who, in this dark and dank place, with the only light being candlelight, which would have danced on the walls. This is the setting for this sermon that wants to proclaim hope, wants to proclaim that we have a God in Jesus who is with us, and this Jesus means business. It's going to happen now, and it's going to be active. And some of that is portrayed in a particular word, euthus, which shows up 41 times in the Gospel of Mark, 11 times in the first chapter. It just means immediately. Over and over and over again in this gospel, the preacher uses this word euthus immediately as a way of proclaiming the urgency of what was happening with Jesus and the urgency of the gospel that's being given to them. It would have had, and the gospel has this rhythm to it. Jesus would teach and then do an act of power. Jesus would offer a parable and then heal. Jesus would interpret the Torah, and then Jesus would walk on water. I mean, there's just this back and forth, this rhythm to the gospel that goes along. And that rhythm, I think, is powerful when we recognize it. Last week, we turned to the fourth gospel, and the fourth chapter of this gospel, which had three teachings. These teachings were organic in nature. They were about seeds and sowers and growth and trees, and a sense that this movement that we're a part of is constantly growing and evolving, and it will bear fruit. And, you know, fruit is not an easy job because fruit can be picked, and fruit is used to feed the people, and then there is compost, and then there's more growing. There's this cycle of faith that's proclaimed in these stories at the beginning of the gospel, the fourth chapter. And the chapter ends with Jesus going with his disciples across the Sea of Galilee, which is really a large lake, about 9 miles on the width. And they're going across the Sea of Galilee, and the winds come up, and the ship is swamped with water, and it starts to go under. And all this while, according to the gospel, Jesus has been sleeping in the back on a cushion. And he's just, you know, it's I have a wonderful painting of the disciples just kind of going crazy, hanging onto the ropes and holding on to the mast and trying to deal with oars while this water's all around. And then there's Jesus in the back, just sleeping away. And the question that really comes up is a question that I asked in a sermon a couple of weeks ago, which is, you know, why didn't they wake Jesus? You know, things really got out of control. They didn't get around to waking up Jesus until they believed that they were going to die. I mean, that was the point where they turned to Jesus and said, "Master, don't you care that we're about to perish?" You know, Jesus is waking up, looking around, and he says, "Be still." Everything is still. And he looks at his disciples and said, "After all that we've been through, wouldn't you have thought I would have been able to help with this situation? Where was your faith? Why didn't, you know, essentially, why didn't you wake me earlier?" And there's lots of reasons why that might be. Pride. I mean, there were fishermen. They've been on that lake their entire lives. There's a certain amount of pride. We should be able to deal with the storm. There's the reality that Jesus is a carpenter. You know, what does he know about sailing a boat across the Sea of Galilee? There's a lot of things that might have come into it, but there just was this reticence to waking up Jesus so that Jesus could make a difference. So this sense of organic growth of the movement, this growth, this faith, which isn't in a linear path, but moves like a winding river, and then out into tributaries, and then coming back together. This sense of a wondrous happening, an organic happening that is the faith. And they have been witnessing, the disciples have been witnessing all this all around them. And they get out into a storm where they are at the mercy of the winds and the waves. And after having seen all that Jesus has done, and after hearing these stories that Jesus taught, it doesn't cross their minds until they're about to die to wake up Jesus. Wow. Just wow. Well, tonight we're jumping into the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Mark. And we're doing it on the heels of the organic sense of stories. Again, there's a rhythm to it. There's these stories, and then there's this act of power that happens. And even as there are 3 stories in the 4th chapter that are about a teaching about what the kingdom of God will be like, there are 3 stories in the 5th chapter that are all acts of power. So even chapter to chapter, there's a bit of a rhythm. The chapter 4 is the only real extended teaching in the Gospel of Mark. It's followed by extended healing in the 5th chapter. And that's what we're going to jump into. And I think part of what we need to look for in these texts, as we look at Mark chapter 5, is when did it become time to wake up Jesus? That question has just been asked. The disciples have such little faith, they don't bother to wake up Jesus. And now we come to these next 3 stories. And one of the questions I want us to listen for is, when do the characters in the story decide it's time to wake up Jesus? It's time to get Jesus involved in this, what's happening. We good? Any questions about where we've been in the 4th chapter of Mark? We just kind of ran through the whole calming of the sea. We only have so much time and chapters to run into, but any questions about that you might have, you wanted to share, or comments? Well, then let's jump straight into chapter 5. And you'll notice the first verse in chapter 5 is, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. So they have gone from one side of the Sea of Galilee, the city of Capernaum, which is a city of Jewish fishermen, and they have traveled across the sea to the city of Gerazet. And the city of Gerazet is one of 10 cities on the other side of the lake that are not Jewish cities, but they are Roman cities. In fact, together they are called the Decapolis. How more Roman can you get than 10 cities to be called the Decapolis? So when Jesus moves from Capernaum over to Gerazet, we are also moving from a Jewish ministry to a ministry to Gentiles. And on the way, there's a storm. Nothing symbolic about that at all. Moving from the Jews to the Gentiles in the history of the church and was never a problem. And when we have this sense of that there's a kind of the division in our societies over, I don't know, race, sexuality, political, affiliations, there's never a storm as we try to bring together the different sides of those who would claim the faith. So I'm just glad that it doesn't happen anymore. So we're going to look at chapter 5, and would someone read for us verse 2 through 13? Is anybody prepared to do that? Verse 2 through 13 of chapter 5.
I can
We
read
can,
it.
yeah.
Hang on.
Great, thanks, Dallas.
2 through 13.
2 through 13.
As soon as he got out of the boat, a man with an unclean spirit came out of the tombs and met him. He lived in the tombs. No one was able to restrain him anymore, even with chains, because he often had been bound with shackles and chains, but had snapped off the chains and smashed the shackles. No one was strong enough to subdue him. And always, night and day, he was crying out among the tombs and in the mountains and cutting himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and knelt down before him. And he cried out with a loud voice, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of Most High God? I beg you, before God, don't torment me." For he had told him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." "What is your name?" he asked him. "My name is Legion," he answered him, "because we are many." And he kept begging him not to send them out of the region. Now a large herd of pigs was there, feeding on the hillside. The demons begged him, "Send us to the pigs so we may enter them." And he gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd of about 2,000 rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned there.
Okay. Very strange story in all different ways.
I think it's a great story for the catacombs.
This is true. This is true. Where was this man living?
The catacombs.
He was living amongst the tombs. And that's where they were worshiping, amongst the tombs. So yeah, wonderful connection, Shelley. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, but I began with the question, at what point in the story is it time to wake up Jesus? At what point does this character decide to encounter Jesus? It's right there in verse 2. I'll make it just be direct about it.
My verse says immediately.
Yes.
Immediately, or as Dallas's version said, as soon as he got out of the boat. The word here is euthus, that word that's used over and over again. Immediately, the man comes out of the tombs and meets him. So we've gone from the disciples who wait until they're about to die with Jesus sleeping to a man with unclean spirits, and he and the unclean spirits and some kind of partnership maybe, or the unclean spirits, is kind of hard to decide. They see Jesus and immediately go to meet him. That immediately is important. That, and oddly enough, the demons who call themselves Legion, which is I think it's 1,000 soldiers. Is that correct? Does anybody know that?
Yeah.
1,000 soldiers, 1,000 Roman soldiers would have been called a legion. So the idea is there's lots and lots of different personalities, demons living within this person, within this man. And they demonstrate something that the disciples don't. What do they demonstrate that the disciples have a hard time doing?
Faith in Jesus.
Well, recognition that he's Son of God.
Yes.
Faith in Jesus, recognition that he's the Son of God. There is this fascinating statement by the preacher of Mark that even Jesus' identity may still be hidden to his disciples in some way, but the principalities and powers that rule the universe know who he is, and they both respect him and fear him. And so they make kind of a preemptive ask. Jesus says, come out of them. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. We're going to preempt this action because you might destroy us if, we come out. We're going to strike a bargain. There's pigs over there, swine, a herd of swine. Why don't you send us into that herd of about 2,000? We're good with that. Don't destroy us, just send us in to the swine. And then the line that comes after that is amazing. I don't know if you missed it. Does anybody have that? Beginning of verse 13.
He gave them permission.
He gave them permission. Jesus has authority over them. So now we've gone from Jesus showing authority in healing and in teaching, and now in the end of chapter 4, he shows authority over nature itself. And here in Gerizet, he demonstrates authority over the principalities and powers of the universe. And those authorities recognize him and have faith in him. We're going to move on to the next story. There's a section below we're not going to really dig into. It's kind of fun because the man goes and tells, kind of makes himself known, and the people see what's happened, and they go to Jesus and say, Jesus, will you please leave town? We're not sure what to do with you. Will you please leave town? It could also be that he just destroyed their livelihood of 2,000 swine. That's enough damage. Get out of town, Jesus. But Jesus does get in the boat and heads back across. I was going this way, I guess, back across the lake again to Capernaum, where another encounter happens there in the city, which begins at verse 21. Would someone read for us just 21 through 24a? Now, if you ever run into this in a listing, it says 24a or 24b, that means that the person who's teaching it doesn't really like the way the first editors divided up the verses. From my perspective, half of 24 goes with one story and half of 24 goes to the next story. So 21 through 24a, just the first part of that last verse.
I'll go ahead and read it.
Thanks, Tom.
When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd.
We're stopping right there. Thank you, Tom. That was perfect. Question again. When was it time to wake up Jesus?
As soon as he got off the boat.
As soon as he got off the boat. this synagogue leader comes to Jesus. Now, there are issues with the synagogue leader coming to Jesus. We found this out at the end of chapter 1 of Mark. Jesus has been hanging out with the unclean, and he's not really allowed in the synagogues anymore. In fact, he doesn't really go into the cities anymore because he's not very welcome. And so people come to the countryside or to the lake to hear him, but this synagogue leader has faith in him and crosses the social and religious divide of clean and unclean and says, come help my daughter. That crossing that divide is important. We've already had a story where Jesus crosses the divide from Jewish to Gentile. Now Jesus is going from outcast Jew into the heart of the synagogue, being with the synagogue leader. It's just a wonderful storytelling. And then 24b through 33. No, 34. 24b through 34. Anyone?
I'll grab it.
Great.
A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding around you," his disciples answered, "and yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering."
Aha. Another healing story. When was it time to wake up Jesus?
Soon as she saw him.
Yeah, the minute that she heard about him, that he was in town, she immediately went there. Now, Nancy, you know more, you have as much experience in the study of the background of the place of women within Jewish society. This is a woman who has had an issue of blood for 12 years. What is her place in that city?
Ostracized. A woman who is bleeding is not to be near people, not to be touched certainly by a man. So yeah, that's the worst thing for a woman is when she's bleeding.
So,
And yet she had the gall to go and touch him, to be in the crowd.
Her risk was just going at all.
Right.
And when she got there, she decided on a course of action. What was her course of action?
She was very stealthy. She came up behind him in the crowd. So she was caught up in the crowd and she came up behind him because she just wanted to touch his cloak.
Yeah.
So she had planned that. She planned in the crowd, come up behind him and just reach out and touch.
Yeah. How horrible would it have been if she had gone before him and he had realized how unclean she was and sent her away. So I love the word stealth.
Wonder where I got that from.
I can't imagine, SEAL team leader. Stealthily came up behind her and just touched the edge of his outer cloak. And immediately she was healed. Now, so we've gone from the disciples who had no faith that Jesus could help to demons who believed Jesus had authority over them, to a synagogue leader who is willing to cross the divide of clean to unclean because he has faith in Jesus, to this woman who would have been very well known, very ostracized. In my own mind, I kind of wonder as she went through the crowd if it didn't kind of part behind Jesus, because no one would have wanted to touch her. But she has so much faith that just immediately she goes, because her faith is so strong, if I just touch the hem of his robe, I will be healed. It's a wonderful story, absolutely wonderful story. I'm going to pause for a minute and see where else you might connect with the story or have questions or thoughts about this story.
What I've always liked about it is I feel they're always contrasting with the disciples, who often are the failures of faith. You know, we're in the boat, they don't want to wake up Jesus, and they're, for whatever reason, they don't have faith in that moment until they're about to die. Whereas she and others just come running out because they have faith. And then the other part that I always like about these stories is we think about it as Jesus is healing these people, but that's not how Jesus often frames it. It's, you are healed because of your faith. I didn't heal you. You healed it because you believed. Again, you have the disciples who deny him and don't want to wake them, but then you have these people coming. I think it's a nice contrast.
Absolutely wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Any other thoughts?
I like the question of Jesus, who touched my clothes? He felt the power leave him, yet he still asked, who touched my clothes? He's sort of like, who touched your clothes, but he asked the question anyway.
Yeah, that's it. I've always wondered, I wonder about that the more I read it. He looked all around to see who had done it. That at verse 32, does he know? He knows that power went from him. Does he know who touched him? The text would kind of say no. Our confession and understanding of Jesus, of having kind of this supernatural power to look into people and know them, says, oh, well, of course he knew. Yeah, we could spend a day right there talking about who is Jesus and what is that image in our lives, and what is from the text, and what have we put on the text. Wow. Yeah, Tom.
I'm thinking
Yeah, go ahead, Shelley. Or who else?
I'm in that same general area with Tom. I'm thinking about the distinctiveness that he is being pressed upon by so many, and yet only this one has this experience. From the story, Jesus is aware of his power, his healing, whatever that connection was between him and the woman was distinctive from all the others who were, according to the disciples, all these others are pressing against you. It seems that there would be, and I know like in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, they show this where people are all grabbing at Jesus and, saying, heal me, heal me, heal me, heal me. So maybe I've been influenced a little bit by Andrew Lloyd Webber, but I'm like, why are we only talking about this one person? Why is Jesus only talking about this one healing?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think even in her mind, as described by Mark, if I just touch him, I will be healed. So when he asked the question, he sort of is saying, okay, that's what you thought, but now present yourself
Mhm,
instead of just sneaking up behind me.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, Mark goes, all the Gospels spend a lot of time talking about the lack of faith of the disciples, how they do not understand, even when they're told point blank what something means, that they get to the end of the story and are baffled at what has happened. The good news of all of that is that we're, at some level, we're supposed to identify with the disciples. And if they can be the builders of the church and leaders of the faith, then there's hope for us. That's kind of the message in there. And yet the heroes of the faith in these stories are the most unlikely heroes. Demons, really? And a woman totally ostracized, a anathema in her village, her city of Capernaum. She's the hero in the story.
And the leader of the synagogue.
Yeah, we're about to get there.
Mhm.
We're about to get there. It's interesting that these two things kind of struggle with one another within Capernaum. You have the leader of the synagogue who sets the rules that would have kept the woman from being able to come into the synagogue. At least he enforces the rules. These are the two people who become the heroes of faith in Capernaum in these stories. There's a dialogue, there's a conflict, can't these two groups love each other kind of feel. Again, we're back to where we started. One side of the lake, the other side of the lake, the Jews and the Gentiles, and all the divisions that we struggle with. Even in this story, the heroes of the faith are utterly divided in their place in the community. They are on opposite ends of the religious spectrum. So let's finish the story of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue. Would someone read verses 35 through 43?
I'll read it. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," I don't know what
That's
that is.
perfect.
Which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was about 12 years of age. Overcome with amazement, he strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat.
Okay. So Jairus has this faith, and he immediately goes to the seashore when he hears that Jesus is there, and acts on his faith. This event happens on the way there, and with the woman who's been hemorrhaging, and immediately after that, someone comes to say to him, "Your daughter is dead." Why trouble the teacher any further? Now, let's put ourselves in Jairus' shoes. He's been to the water. He's invited the outcast Jesus because he believes in him. This commotion has happened where a woman who is not allowed in a synagogue has been healed. And as they turn to go again toward his house, he learns that his daughter is dead. Where is Jairus at this point in his faith and his understanding of Jesus? Any thoughts?
You had to stop and heal the woman? I had you first.
Mhm. Mhm.
Aha, I'm the leader of the synagogue. This is the woman that everybody's supposed to stay away from. You stop for her? That's one thought. What else do we have?
He may have been thinking also another miracle. I believe in the right person. I believe that he truly is the Son of God.
Yeah, this event could have had the opposite effect, that it reassured his faith. That's possible.
And Mark doesn't show us any reaction from Jairus. The people come and say, your daughter's dead. And Jesus immediately says, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. So maybe Jairus had just heard it, and before he could even react, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. And then they continue their walk. I mean,
It's at this point in time, we don't really know, but we're kind of asked to enter into the character by the story, because what is clear is that Jairus is having his faith tested. And that is a theme within the Gospels, a testing of faith. He demonstrated faith. He witnessed a miracle. His daughter is dead. His heart falls. As a parent, there's no reaction other than total devastation. And at this moment of testing faith, Jesus gives him what he needs: a word of encouragement. Do not be afraid, only believe. Honestly, that's what I need a lot. And I don't know if y'all have grasped in your own life the power of encouragement with other people, but I encourage you to consider that. Leslie, you're boarding your flight. We love you. Love you. Be safe out there. Say happy
Thank you,
birthday
everyone.
happy birthday to your mom.
I will. Bye-bye.
There are a couple of interesting other things in the story, which I'm just going to run through quickly because I want us to talk a little bit about something. The commotion at the house, he's the leader of the synagogue. He would have been a man of means, and people of means at the point that somebody died would hire mourners to come and weep and wail on behalf of the person who has passed. It just was a tradition. So these people who are professional weeping and wailers have no trouble laughing at Jesus when he says the girl is just asleep. They're like, we do this for a living. The girl is dead. And Jesus just, it's more forceful in other gospels, but Jesus just puts them out of the house. I didn't look at the Greek for this one. And he put them all outside in verse 40. There is a gospel that literally means picked up and threw. The verb here, Jesus picked up and threw them outside. I love that. I just love that. I don't know if it's in Mark or not, but one of the gospels does it that way. Good fun. Talitha cum, little girl, Talitha cum. The Greek word is, as if y'all are going to remember this anyway, egeno, which is the word rise, which is the same word used for Jesus when he rises from the grave. So we have this connection between the rising of this little girl and the rising of Jesus at the day of resurrection. It's an unusual word. You wouldn't have used it here. It doesn't mean get up. It means rise. Just it's an unusual word to have used in the context. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Well, no, wait a minute. I'm in the wrong one. Immediately the girl got up and began to walk. He tells them not to tell anybody. Let's not go there again. Jesus has this thing about telling them to not tell anybody, and it's just like reverse psychology. You know full well they're just going to go out and tell more people.
But interesting, if you go back to the beginning of this chapter, the man from the catacombs that he released the demons from wanted to go with him. And he said, no, stay here and go tell everyone what the Lord did for you.
Yes.
He comes back here with strict orders not to tell anyone.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about at the end of chapter 1 how Jesus told that man who was afflicted with leprosy, told him not to go out and tell anybody, but he did go tell everybody, and there were consequences. Jesus could no longer go into the synagogue. He could no longer go into a town. And I believe it sets in motion from that point the road to the cross. Jesus chooses to heal him out of compassion, and doing so, Jesus knows the end consequence here. But I choose anyway. And scripture is very clear. I do choose. So, he's in the synagogue leader's house. He's still got all the, all those restrictions. Maybe he doesn't want to, we don't exactly know what that's about. But what I'm interested in at this point, these are 3 stories where the heroes of faith, if there are 3 poles, 3 dramatic poles away from each other, demon, ostracized woman, man in leadership. You've got this kind of triangle of beings that are opposed to one another. They become the heroes of faith because they act immediately. They act on their faith immediately. My question is, where in our own lives right now, or maybe someplace that you can think of in the past, where it might be a good idea to wake up Jesus immediately? Or where have there been times when you kind of just went it alone, kind of left your faith behind you, thinking that you could probably take care of it yourself, or it wasn't going to, it's going to be okay, and we're just going to leave faith out of the picture? I'm kind of wondering, does something come to mind that you would be willing to share? There's no forced option, but I'm just interested. Does this urgency and our unwillingness to act on it, where does it touch us? kind of a tough question.
Kinda. Well, I'm trying to kind of break my mind out of the literal pictures in the story. And I appreciate your phrase, when is it time to wake up Jesus? But I'm not sure what it means to wake up Jesus in my life. I'm not literally on a boat that's sinking. So, I mean, like, I'm trying to imagine, what does it mean to wake up Jesus if I'm in any kind of struggle or time of difficulty? What is, Jesus isn't literally sleeping on a cushion on my couch. If I just wake him up, all would be better. I'm just trying to go to, what does this even mean to wake up Jesus?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples from my own life and see if it stirs anything. It wasn't all that long ago when I was in conflict with another minister, and it got hurtful. Just did. Ministers are human too. And in that exchange, and in the time following, when I'm kind of nursing my wounds, I really didn't bring faith into the conversation. I talked to people of faith about it, but I didn't clearly choose to engage my faith in it. It was like, no, that was hurtful. I'll get over it. As opposed to Leslie Bailey, who many of you know, whose housemate Danny went into the hospital and with COVID, 2 days later was put on a ventilator, and nobody could visit her. And her prognosis was really bad. At the first moment that I heard about this, I didn't hesitate to pledge myself to prayer and to reach out to the entire community to say, we need to be in prayer. The difference between the two in my head right at the moment is, one, I thought I could deal with. The other one, I knew full well I had no control over. There's a lot of stuff in the middle, kind of where I think we need to be living. But for me, that's kind of an example.
I have a fairly recent personal example, and without getting into the background of it, I was not doubting my faith, but I was doubting, I guess, a limit of forgiveness. How far was I pushing it? Is there any more left? And I struggled. I really struggled, and I contacted a good friend of ours, a religious leader, and I asked to sit down with him, and we had an hour and a half amazing discussion. And the reassurances, professional, personal, spiritual, that there's no limit to the forgiveness. And it was a hurdle that I needed to get over, because I didn't go immediately. I pushed it off and pushed it off, but when I did finally make the decision and I went, the relief was divine, truly was.
It's a great example. Thank you for being willing to share that, Tom.
I wish I had gone immediately.
Any other thoughts or wonderings around the question or around the text? I'll leave it open. We have a few minutes that we can wonder a little bit about.
As a numbers guy, there's 12 years of suffering from the woman, and the daughter was 12 years old, with the many occurrences of 12 in the Old and the New Testament.
1, 3, 7, 12.
Too bad
12
the
kind of
demon's name wasn't doesn't.
Excuse me?
I said, too bad the demon's name wasn't doesn't instead of legion.
Instead of legion.
Oh, that's
12 pigs threw themselves off the cliff.
Right.
yeah. It can't be that obvious.
Yeah, I know. Make us work a little bit.
Mm.
I have a quick question from
Sure.
the historical standpoint. How do people know that the ostracized woman was bleeding?
Well,
Should have wear scarlet A or something, you know?
that's an interesting question. It's clear from the text that she's seen doctors and it has been aware to the people that she's been doing this. Within the cultural context, I don't know what was happening at that moment historically, but a few hundred years earlier, she would have been in the tent where women went when they were bleeding, and she never would have left. In this historical context at this time period, my guess is there's also a kind of segregation that's obvious, but I don't know what it is.
And I would say that the townspeople knew, because she had been separated, and maybe I don't know about the tent if that was at that time, but she may have left the tent knowing, because the women would go once a month, they would be in the tent with her. Otherwise she's by herself. But that they would have said, he's coming into town, and she knew, I know I need to go. So that's a possibility too.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The women shared that kind of experience as a community.
Yes.
So everybody kind of knew each other's cycles, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would cross my mind is this woman may have had an interesting ministry caring for the women who come and go. They may have known her real well.
Mm-hmm.
And she
Well,
known them.
an interesting thing is that women who are close begin to cycle together.
Mm-hmm.
Their cycles harmonize, I suppose is a good word for that.
I don't know if there is a good word for that, but yeah, I understand.
No,
I've
probably
heard that
not.
as well.
4 daughters. Dale knows. Dale
Yeah,
knows.
4 daughters, yeah.
And a wife.
Yeah, my daughters were pretty freaked out when I, without thinking about it, kind of let it be known that I knew what their cycles were. They were not happy about that. Not at all. Temple, be aware of this. They will not be happy. I'm going to close with a story which I read today in preparation for Sunday's gathering. It's the story of the woman who writes the book Holy Chaos, Amanda Henderson, and she is a an organizer of people of different religious faiths to speak out to the community on issues of social justice. That's the short version. In the chapter I was reading, she talked about hearing the news of the shooting of in the nightclub in Florida, where so many gay men were killed. And then learning quickly that this person was Muslim and had nothing to do with the situation, but she immediately knew that her LGBT friends, her Muslim friends, were going to be under attack. And what was interesting in her story, I think she actually uses the word, she immediately goes and gathers with her friends from different faiths to support one another and to draw upon their faith in this moment. The chapter is about friendship, and her expression was, her reason for telling the story is to say what made that possible is that they had built friendships over time. And they were not strangers, but friends, even across the divides of different faiths, different sexual orientations. And as I was listening to y'all talk, I came back to this story and going, it wasn't just that they were friends, they were partners in faith. Using their faith to impact their community. They were practiced at putting their faith into action. What I would call putting the compassion of Jesus into action. They were practiced at it, and they didn't hesitate to immediately act. This section of Mark, for me, has always raised the question, because I started up with just an idea decades ago. Why the heck didn't they wake up Jesus? It just seems silly. And it's grown over time. And in this moment, I'm kind of wondering if we're not challenged to practice acting on our faith with other people of faith, so that when there are times when we need to care for those who are hurting, or there's a justice need in the world, or even just a family member who's going through a tough time, our immediate reaction is to act on our faith and bring our faith along with us in the process. So I leave you with that to think about and pray about, and also to remember that for most of the Gospels, we're supposed to identify with the disciples who were just really bad at this. So if we don't get it right soon, that's okay. The next step, the next opportunity, the next friendship, another step forward. We're a little over time. I don't know, I had a GIF, I think that's how you pronounce it, I saw on my Facebook page yesterday. The funniest thing I've seen in forever. I just cackled out loud. This man is with his, I don't know, Shelly, 18-month-old son in the park. He's a big man, little bitty kid. And he does a one-handed cartwheel.
The man.
excuse me, the man does, one-handed cartwheel. And the kid is looking at this and gets down low and just kind of commits to flying like Superman and just on the ground, face, body, it's all one action, one hit. And I'm like, that's commitment. I mean, there wasn't any bit of his being that wasn't utterly committed that I'm going to do that too. And that's the best he had. Yeah, I think
Kids
that's
tend to
kind of
be
where
that
we are in trying to follow the example of Jesus sometimes. You know, we just give the best we have. Maybe we fall flat on our faces. And God laughs. Who knows? Thank you, my friends, for being with me this evening. I want to let you go to honor our time as best we can. We'll be back again next week. It's slated as the last time that we're together in this setting. And I wanted to ask tonight real quick, would y'all be interested in starting up again after Thanksgiving and going another 3 weeks? Because there is another 3 Thursdays before we get to Christmas.
Yes.
If you're interested, could you raise a hand or
Yes.
Suzanne? Enough people to make this good. Good. It's not, again, it's not a forced option. Not everybody has to come back after Thanksgiving, but we will gather again after Thanksgiving and go another 3 weeks into the Gospel of Mark together. Go in peace, my friends. Glad you're here.
See y'all
Thank
later.
you.
Thanks, Dale.
Good night.
Good night.
Shelley, can I talk to you for just a second?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.